"Get out of my way. I paid for this cabin." Those words were still hanging in the recycled air of first class when it happened. Cold. That was the first thing Maya Caldwell felt. Not pain, not humiliation. Just cold. Amber liquid struck her chest like a slap from something invisible, spreading fast through the ivory cashmere of her sweater, soaking through to her skin in the space of a single breath. Ice cubes scattered across her laptop keyboard, with a sound like small stones hitting glass, and one slid off the armrest and disappeared beneath the seat with a quiet final click. The first-class cabin of Apex Continental Flight 277 bound from JFK International to London Heathrow went absolutely silent. Not the polite silence of people being careful. The silence of 40 people who had just watched something cross a line they did not know existed until it was already behind them. Douglas Hargrove sat back in seat 2B. His crystal tumbler was still in his hand, tilted at the angle of a man who has just released something and has not yet decided whether to regret it. He looked at the woman beside him at the bourbon dripping from her chin and soaking through her sweater, and a smirk moved across his face. Not large, not theatrical. Just the small, satisfied expression of a man who has done what he came to do. He looked around the cabin for agreement, for the nods of people who understood, for someone, anyone, to reflect back the certainty that he had simply handled a situation that needed handling. He found none of that. What he found instead was the face of the woman in 3. A phone already raised, eyes wide and furious. The face of the older gentleman in 3B recording silently, his expression carrying the specific gravity of someone who has spent a career watching people make the worst decisions of their lives in real time. He found the faces of passengers in rows 4 and 5 who had turned completely around in their seats. He found the face of the junior flight attendant sprinting from the galley, her hand pressed to her mouth. What he did not find in any direction was a single person who looked at him the way he expected. And in seat 2, Maya Caldwell had not moved. She sat exactly as she had sat for the past 8 hours. Back straight, hands in her lap, eyes forward. The bourbon was running down the side of her face, catching the dim amber light of the cabin, and she did not reach up to wipe it. Not yet. She sat in the wet sweater with the ice melting into the fabric, and she looked at the middle distance with an expression that nobody in that cabin could fully name. It was not shock, it was not rage. It was the specific, terrible calm of a woman who had already decided what came next. Douglas Hargrove did not know that 40 minutes ago, while the aircraft was somewhere above the dark Irish Sea, 3 encrypted messages had been sent from Seat 2A to the Ground Operations Center of Apex Continental in London. He did not know that the Metropolitan Police Aviation Security Unit had already been dispatched to Terminal 3. He did not know that the $320 million corporate travel contract between his firm and this airline had already been flagged for immediate termination. He did not know any of it because nothing about the woman sitting beside him had suggested in 8 hours of deliberate escalating provocation that she was anything more than a quiet nobody who had wandered into a cabin she did not belong in. He was wrong about all of it. Flight 277 had 4 hours and 20 minutes remaining in the air. Douglas Hargrove did not know that he would spend none of them as a free man. He set his glass down on the tray table and opened his mouth to say something, to explain perhaps, or to double down, or to invoke the platinum status and the client meetings and the £400 million deal closing in London at 2 p.m. that had defined his entire identity for the last 8 months. Maya finally reached up and wiped the bourbon from her chin. Slowly, deliberately. She looked down at her laptop, still running the keyboard glistening with scotch. Then she looked at Douglas, and for the first time in 8 hours, she let him see her eyes completely. He stopped talking. He did not know why. Only that something in that gaze reached past the alcohol and the entitlement and the performance and touched something cold and fundamental in his chest. To understand what happened next, we have to go back 11 hours earlier, to a lounge at JFK, to the moment before the match was struck. The Apex Continental flagship lounge at Terminal 4, JFK, was the kind of place that worked very hard to seem effortless. The lighting was calibrated to make everyone look slightly better than they were. The espresso was excellent. The chairs cost more than some people's monthly rent, and they were arranged with enough space between them to suggest that the people sitting in them did not need to be near other people and preferred it that way. Maya Caldwell sat in the far corner, her back to the wall in a chair that faced the room. Old habit. She was wearing a charcoal cashmere sweater, unbranded, and dark slim trousers, and she had her worn leather tote on the floor beside her feet, instead of on the adjacent chair, the way most first-class passengers placed their bags as territorial markers. Her tablet was open on her lap. The screen showed a dense grid of restructuring files, deployment metrics, and acquisition balance sheets. Anyone glancing over would have seen a document so complex it looked like a foreign language. She had been reviewing it for 40 minutes without looking up. On the screen, the acquisition was complete on paper. Apex Continental Airways, a mid-sized transatlantic carrier with solid roots and a corroding internal culture, had been absorbed by the holding group that Maya had spent 7 years building. The board had confirmed her appointment as CEO 10 days ago. The announcement was scheduled for 30 days from now at a press event in London. Until then, she had asked for something unusual, a 90-day observation window. No fanfare, no introduction, no announcement to the airline's staff or senior management. She wanted to understand what she had bought before the company understood who had bought it. Her phone buzzed once. She picked it up. Lena Marsh, her executive assistant, was a woman who communicated with the precision of someone who understood that every unnecessary word was a tax on the listener's attention. Lena said, "All systems are confirmed on the London end. First official board meeting is 9 a.m. tomorrow. No one at Apex knows your flight." Maya said, "Good, keep it that way." She hung up and went back to her screen. Across the lounge, a sound cut through the muted symphony of espresso cups and quiet conversations like a foghorn through still water. "I don't care if the restructuring takes 6 months. David, gut the department. Fire them all if you have to. Just make the margins look clean for Q3. That is what I am paying you to figure out, not me." Maya raised her eyes. Standing near the complimentary champagne bar was a man in his early 50s. Custom navy suit, the kind that costs enough that the tailor's name is the label. A watch that sat on his wrist like a small announcement, a Patek Philippe rose gold. The case catching the lounge light every time he gestured, which was often. Salt and pepper hair slicked back from a face that was used to being looked at. He was on the phone, and he was performing the call as much as having it, his voice carrying deliberately across the space landing in other people's conversations, like a stone in still water. He jabbed his thumb into his phone screen to end the call, blew out a breath of theatrical exasperation, and snapped his fingers at a passing lounge attendant without making eye contact. "Double espresso, and make sure it is actually hot this time." The attendant, young, maybe 22, dark-haired, a name tag that read Marco, nodded without a word and moved toward the bar. Maya watched Marco's face for exactly 1 second. The expression was not resentment or offense. It was something much more mundane and much sadder, the absence of surprise. This was simply the weather. You moved through it. Maya looked back at her screen. She opened a secondary application on her tablet, the Executive Access Portal, accessible only to top-tier personnel in the Apex Continental corporate structure, and entered a search. The name came back in 4 seconds. Douglas Hargrove, Senior Managing Director, Meridian Capital Partners. Elite Platinum Tier Member, Apex Continental Frequent Flyer Program. Corporate Account Number MC7741. Meridian Capital was currently in the final stages of negotiating an exclusive corporate travel contract with Apex Continental. The contract value $320 million over 5 years. Final approval authority rested with the incoming CEO. Maya read the profile for 30 seconds. She closed the portal. She went back to her restructuring files. Marco returned with the espresso. Douglas took it without acknowledgement and resumed his call, pacing a small circuit near the champagne bar, his voice still performing for the room. Maya looked at Marco as he walked back toward the service station. She caught his eye when he passed her chair. "Thank you for the tea earlier," she said quietly. "It was perfect." Marco stopped, mildly startled. He recovered quickly, and the smile that came onto his face was the genuine kind, not the calibrated customer service version. "You are welcome," he said. "You are the only one today who said that." She nodded and went back to her screen. Across the lounge, Douglas had ended his second call and was checking his watch with the urgency of a man who measures his own importance in increments of minutes. He was by any external measure at the peak of everything. A £400 million hostile corporate takeover deal closing in London tomorrow. His founding partner, Gerald Ashford, flying in from Zurich just to sign alongside him. A partnership guaranteed at the end of the fiscal year if the numbers held. A career that had been built on leverage and the particular talent for making other people's problems feel like their own fault. He was also, though he would not have described it this way, a man who had been running very fast for a very long time and had made the mistake of believing that speed was the same as direction. He noticed Maya for the first time when he was sitting down with his espresso, having claimed a chair 3 seats away from her, angled toward the room so he could be seen thinking. He looked at her the way he looked at everything, as a quick assessment of value and category. He saw a black woman, alone, unbranded clothing, worn tote small tablet. His brain filed her in a category and moved on. He did not open the category again. It was not worth opening. The boarding announcement for Apex Continental Flight 277 JFK to London Heathrow came over the lounge speaker at 7:48 p.m. Maya closed her tablet, gathered her tote, and walked toward the gate with the unhurried confidence of someone who has no need to rush. She passed Marco on the way out. He gave her a brief nod. She boarded first. She found seat 2A in the first-class cabin. A window pod port side with a view that would be solid darkness once they were over water. She settled her tote beneath the seat, opened her tablet, and noted in the margin of her deployment report, "Crew energy on boarding observe." 8 minutes later, Douglas Hargrove stepped through the forward cabin door. He had the slightly aggressive bearing of a man who boards an airplane like he is walking into a room he already owns. He glanced at his boarding pass. Seat 2B. He looked at 2A. His eyes moved across Maya, the sweater, the tote, the tablet, with the same brief, dismissive calculation as in the lounge. Something shifted in his expression. Not hostility, not yet. Just the particular calculation of a man deciding whether the person next to him is worth acknowledging and arriving at his answer before he had taken another step. He stowed his bag and sat down. Maya did not look up from her screen. He arrived at row 2 with a leather garment bag the size of a small coffin. It was clearly oversized for the carry-on overhead wider than the bin, the kind of bag that required negotiation and goodwill from everyone in the surrounding rows. Douglas carried it with the absolute certainty of a man who has never once been told that his luggage was anyone else's problem. He reached the overhead bin above seat 2B and found it occupied. Maya's compact leather tote sat neatly in the near corner. Douglas looked at it the way he looked at things that were in his way, briefly analytically, and with the immediate conclusion that the obstacle should move. He shoved past Maya's shoulder to reach the bin. There was no excuse me. No acknowledgement that his elbow had connected with the side of her head hard enough that she had to put a hand on the armrest to steady herself. He grabbed the bin handle and yanked it fully open, assessed the space, and turned to Maya with the flat patience of someone explaining something obvious to someone slow. "Move your bag to the back," he said. "I need this space." Maya looked up at him. "There is plenty of space in the bin across the aisle," she said. Her voice was even and entirely without apology. Douglas stared at her for a moment. His mouth moved slightly as though recalibrating. "My seat is 2B, he said. "Right here. The bin above my seat is mine by standard protocol. Move it." "My bag is already secured," Maya said. "It belongs in the bin designated for this row." She looked back at her screen. "I am sure the flight attendant can assist you if you are having difficulty finding space for your bag." Douglas's eyes did a slow, deliberate pass down from her face to the unbranded sweater, to the worn tote, to the tablet with the cracked corner, and arrived back at her face carrying a verdict. He did not say the verdict aloud, not yet. Sophia Reyes appeared from the galley with the brisk professional energy of someone who has been managing this particular category of problem for 11 years and has developed a very efficient system for it. She was 34, dark-haired, with the kind of composed competence that took years to build, and looked effortless to everyone except the people who had paid for it. Her smile was real, but it was tired around the edges the way a good coat looks when it has been through too many seasons. She looked at the situation. She looked at Douglas's garment bag. She looked at Maya's bag in the bin. She performed a rapid internal calculation in which the platinum tier profile, the flagged corporate account, and the particular energy radiating from Douglas's posture were all weighted against the certain fact that this confrontation, if it continued, would delay the departure. She turned to Maya with an apologetic expression that was genuine and guilty at the same time. "Ma'am, would you mind terribly if we relocated your bag to the bin at row 4, just to accommodate the garment bag?" Maya looked at Sophia. She held the flight attendant's gaze for exactly one beat long enough to see past the professional smile to the "please don't make this harder" that lived behind it. 11 years of that look, she thought. At least 11. She said, "That is perfectly fine." Douglas muttered something as he forced his bag into the newly cleared space. The words were quiet but precise and aimed at the back of Maya's head. Shouldn't even be in this cabin. Maya opened a new document on her tablet. She typed, "Flight 277. Pre-departure. Passenger 2B demanded crew relocate seated passenger's bag without justification. Crew complied under pressure. Employee FA3312. Note for file." She set the tablet on her lap. She was already working. In row 3. Directly across the aisle, Cassandra Flores had been watching since the moment Douglas arrived at row 2. She was 38, a travel journalist with a newsletter that had grown in 3 years of consistent, sharp-eyed documentation of the aviation industry to a readership of 80,000, a third of whom tuned into her occasional live streams. She had a particular eye for the kind of incident that looked like a small thing until you looked at it straight on. She had been looking at this one straight on since Douglas's elbow connected with Maya's head. She did not reach for her phone yet. She lowered it onto her lap screen, dark thumb resting on the edge, waiting. In 3B beside her, Arthur Blythe had the stillness of a man accustomed to observing without reacting. He was 62, white-haired, dressed in the plain, well-made clothes of someone who had long since stopped having anything to prove. He had been a circuit court judge for 24 years before his retirement. He had watched thousands of people make thousands of decisions and had learned that the most important decisions were rarely the loudest ones. He had watched Douglas arrive. He had watched Maya decline to move her bag. He had watched Sophia's face while she asked the question, and Maya's face while she agreed. He reached into his jacket pocket and made sure his phone had a full charge. At the front of the cabin, Natalie Dunn was completing the pre-departure check, moving down the aisle with the quick, purposeful energy of someone who was 26 and still believed that doing the job correctly was the most straightforward thing in the world. She had been flying with Apex Continental for 14 months. She was good at the work. She was still outraged by things that Sophia had long since folded into her understanding of the job. She passed row 2. She glanced at Douglas, already settled into 2B, already claiming the shared center console with both elbows' legs spread wide, headphones out and in his lap as if preparing to colonize a territory. She glanced at Maya, who was reading and ignoring him completely. Her eyes met Maya's for a brief moment. Maya gave her nothing, just a small neutral nod. Natalie moved on. The last passengers filtered into the cabin. The forward door sealed with a pressurized thud. The engines began their low preliminary hum, the sound of enormous machinery waking up slow and certain. Douglas put his headphones in, pulled them out, ordered a drink before the attendants had the carts out, was told they would begin service after takeoff, and made a sound that communicated precisely what he thought of that policy. Maya read her deployment report. Douglas looked at the seatback screen and then at Maya's screen and then back at his own. He noticed she had angled her tablet slightly away from him. He found this, for reasons he could not have articulated, annoying. He leaned back in his seat. He was going to be in London in 7 hours. His deal was going to close. Gerald was flying in from Zurich. The partnership was as good as confirmed. He had £400 million closing tomorrow afternoon, and he was in 2B on a transatlantic flight, and the woman next to him was some kind of consultant or HR nobody, and none of this was worth his attention. He told himself this. The aircraft rolled back from the gate. The cabin crew ran through the safety demonstration. Cassandra watched the safety demo and watched Douglas simultaneously, her thumb still resting on the edge of her phone. Arthur had his newspaper open across his lap. The retired print edition deliberately unhurried. The plane lined up at the head of the runway. Maya closed her eyes for exactly 3 seconds. Not in fear. In the specific kind of preparation that looks from the outside exactly like calm. The engine screamed up to full thrust. The aircraft released its brakes and began to move, accelerating down the runway with the enormous, deliberate energy of something that knows exactly where it is going. The nose lifted. The tarmac fell away. New York City spread out below them, a grid of light dissolving into dark water. Maya opened her eyes. She was here to see what this airline truly was. She was about to find out considerably faster than she had planned. The seatbelt sign turned off with a soft chime 40 minutes into the flight. Below them, the last lights of the eastern seaboard were giving way to the flat darkness of the open Atlantic. The cabin had transitioned into its cruising configuration. Lights dimmed to a warm amber, the ambient hum of the engines settling into something almost meditative. Blankets distributed, pods beginning to recline. Douglas Hargrove snapped his fingers. The gesture had a particular quality, not loud, not frantic, but precise, and practiced the snap of a man who had used this sound to summon people for so long that it had become reflexive the way other people say, "Excuse me." He did it twice, aimed at the aisle. Sophia appeared. "Good evening, Mr. Hargrove. What can I get for you?" Douglas settled back with the expansive posture of a man making himself at home in a space that he had already decided was his. Glenlivet, double, neat, warm mixed nuts not from a packet, and whatever sparkling water you have that is not from a plastic bottle. Of course. Sophia smiled. "We carry San Pellegrino in glass. Will that suit?" "It will have to," Douglas said, which was not an answer. Sophia turned. Douglas added, "And make sure the nuts are actually warm this time. Last flight I was on, they were barely room temperature. I filed a complaint about it." Sophia said yes, of course, and walked back toward the galley. In the galley entrance, Natalie was doing the beverage setup. She had heard all of it. She looked at Sophia with an expression that asked a question. Sophia shook her head very slightly, the tiny headshake of someone who has been communicating across crowded cabins for over a decade, meaning not yet let it go, it is not worth it yet. Natalie looked back at the cart. She moved the glasses with unnecessary precision. Douglas was on his second drink before they cleared the first hour. He had opened his laptop and was reviewing documents with the focus of a man who needed witnesses to his focus. Numbers moved across his screen. He muttered occasionally an acquisition figure here, a projected margin there at a volume calibrated to carry just far enough to suggest importance without quite being a full sentence. He glanced at Maya's screen. She had angled it further away from him. He found this again disproportionately irritating. He looked at her for a moment. She was reading. The tablet. The same cracked corner device as in the lounge, its screen dense with data that he could not see clearly enough to identify. She turned a page of data the way people turn pages of something genuinely interesting. Not performing interest. Having it. He set his glass down. So he said. Maya did not look up. He said it again with slightly more volume, the way people repeat words they believe should have worked the first time. "So, who do you work for? Or is this a miles thing? Points redemption?" Maya turned her head slowly. She looked at him with the patient attention of someone who has been interrupted in the middle of something they care about and is deciding whether the interruption is worth the cost of responding. "I work for myself," she said, "and I do not use miles for my travel." Douglas produced a short barking laugh that contained no actual amusement. "Right," he said. "Sure you don't." He shifted in his seat, crossing his legs, adjusting his watch on his wrist with the reflexive vanity of a man for whom the watch was armor. "I am a managing director at Meridian Capital Partners. You have probably heard of us. We manage portfolios that have more zeros than most people can count. I fly this route twice a month. I have been flying it for 9 years. He paused, waiting for the reaction he was accustomed to. He got none. He continued, "Closing a £400 million acquisition tomorrow. London." The other firm doesn't even know what hit them yet. Maya said congratulations on the deal. She returned to her screen. Douglas stared at her for a moment. The pleasantry had been genuine and completely unimpressed, which was somehow worse than if she had been rude. He ordered his third drink. What Maya was looking at, angled entirely away from Douglas, was the executive access portal. She had pulled up the full profile on Meridian Capital, the corporate travel account, the contract value, the timeline. She read it with the same careful, unrushed attention she gave everything. Then she opened a secondary file, a complaints log aggregated from the past 18 months, covering first-class cabins on transatlantic routes. She filtered by reported incidents. She scrolled for 60 seconds. She opened a new encrypted document and began drafting an internal memo. The working title was Passenger Conduct Standards, In-Flight Enforcement Gap Analysis. She was not writing it for anyone yet. She was thinking on paper the way she had always thought best. Sophia came through the cabin with the drinks cart. She reached Maya's row and paused. "Can I get you anything?" Maya looked up. "Sparkling water, please." She paused. "And Sophia, are you doing all right?" Sophia stopped. The question landed with the specific surprise of something that does not happen often enough to be expected. She recovered quickly with the professional smile. "Of course. Thank you for asking." Maya said, "I mean it genuinely. You are doing a very good job tonight." Sophia held her gaze for a moment. Something small and careful moved in her expression, not quite emotion, more like a door opening 1 inch and then being held. "Thank you," she said, and the thank you was real in a way that her first answer had not been. She moved on with the cart. In 3. Cassandra Flores had been watching the exchange. She had her phone face down on the tray table screen dark, but her eyes were moving between rows 2 and 3 with the quick, calibrated attention of someone building a story in real time. She was not sure yet what the story was. She was sure there was one. She picked up her phone and opened the live stream application. She did not go live. She pressed record, just in case. Arthur beside her had his newspaper up and had not turned a page in 15 minutes. Douglas was on his third Glenlivet. He had pushed the shared center console into Maya's half of the pod space with the gradual confidence of someone who tests boundaries slowly enough that each individual increment seems deniable. His left elbow was 6 inches into her side of the divider. His shoes were off. He had reclined his seat to full flat without checking whether that angle interfered with Maya's ability to work. It did not as it happened, but the intent was legible. Maya shifted slightly. She was not retreating, she was simply noting. Outside, the Atlantic was dark and featureless below the cloud cover. They were 7 miles up. The air pressure in the cabin was calibrated to the equivalent of 6,000 feet of altitude, dry and thin and slightly surreal. The kind of atmosphere that makes small irritations feel larger and large ones feel absolute. Douglas looked at Maya's screen again, still angled away. He looked at her profile, the focus, the stillness, the complete absence of performance. He was a man who had spent his career in rooms where everyone performed constantly, where stillness was a strategy and silence was always a move. He understood performance. He did not understand what she was doing, because what she was doing was simply working, and she was not doing it for him. This was what bothered him. He had understood it precisely, and he could not make it stop. He ordered a 4th drink. When Sophia came back, she said very gently, "Mr. Hargrove, I want to make sure your dinner service is excellent tonight. Can I bring you some coffee alongside the whiskey? The meal service begins in about an hour, and I would love for you to enjoy it fully." It was a professional de-escalation deployed with the skill of someone who has done it thousands of times. It worked about half the time. Douglas looked at her and said, "Bring the drink. I am not a child." Sophia brought the drink. In the galley, Natalie watched her set it on the tray and said very quietly, "Sophia." "I know," Sophia said. "Then why?" "Because this is the job," Sophia said. She said it the way she said everything in the galley, matter-of-fact, without drama, with the flat acceptance of someone for whom the weather is what it is. Natalie looked at her for a long moment. Then she turned back to her setup and did not say anything else. She did not agree. But she was 26, and she had not yet earned the right to the argument she wanted to have. The dinner service began at the 2-hour mark, somewhere above the mid-Atlantic. Douglas sent the first plate back. The filet was overcooked. He said it should have been medium rare, and it was closer to medium. He said this in the tone of someone who considers this a failure of significant moral dimension. Sophia took the plate without comment. She returned to the galley, spoke to the crew, returned with a second preparation. Douglas examined it, moved the sauce to one side with the edge of his knife, the way a dissatisfied child moves food around a plate. He said, "Better. Not good, but better." He cut into the filet. He ate. Natalie was distributing warm rolls in the forward rows. She moved with efficiency and kept her eyes forward and did not look at Douglas, but she was listening to everything. She had been listening since before Wheels Up. Douglas finished half his meal, pushed the plate slightly away, and turned to Maya. She was eating her own dinner with the focused attention she gave everything. She had thanked Sophia when the plate was set down. She had asked for ground pepper and said please and thank you. She was now reading something on her tablet between bites, the document angled away, her posture entirely self-contained. Douglas watched her for a moment. "You know what your problem is," he said. Maya did not look up. He said it again the way he said everything the second time, with slightly more authority, as if volume were a form of clarity. "You know what your problem is. You are too quiet. People like you think that staying quiet is a power move. It is not. It is just small." Maya continued eating. Douglas leaned slightly forward. He had a specific voice for this, not shouting, not aggressive, but intimate in the way of a man who believes that getting close to someone is the same as having power over them. "You know the type," he continued. "You come up here and you do not engage, and you act like the silence makes you better than everyone else. It does not. It makes you invisible." Maya set down her fork. She turned her head and looked at him with the complete, unrushed attention of someone who has decided this moment is worth the cost of engagement. "I find," she said, "that people who need the room to know how important they are usually have very clear reasons for the insecurity." She picked up her fork and went back to her dinner. Douglas's face changed. The color moved into it differently. Not the flush of embarrassment, but the harder, uglier red of a man who has been touched in a place he guards. He straightened in his seat. He set his glass down with a sound that was slightly too deliberate to be casual. "People like you," he started. He stopped himself. "People like you are the reason this cabin has no standard anymore. They upgrade anyone now. Fill the seats, keep the numbers up, and suddenly people who actually belong up here have to share the space with people who—" He stopped again. The word was there. He was 3 drinks past the point where the filter was reliable. He felt it on his tongue like a stone. He did not say it. "Finish that sentence," Maya said. She was still looking at him. Her voice was entirely quiet. She was not angry. She was something more focused than angry. Douglas looked at her eyes, and something in him recalibrated not out of conscience but out of an animal instinct that told him the ground was less stable than it had looked. He picked up his glass instead. "Go on," she said. "Finish it." He drank. In 3A, Cassandra Flores had been live on her channel for 11 minutes. The viewer count was at 12,000. She held the phone low, pressed against the base of her tray table, angled toward row 2. She had said nothing since going live. She simply pointed the lens at what was happening and let it speak. The comments were scrolling faster than she could read them. Appalling. "Who is she? This is on video. Somebody needs to see this. Please tell me," she says something back. "Is this real?" Arthur Blythe, retired Judge 3. B had not turned a newspaper page in 35 minutes. His phone was out, propped against the wall of his pod recording with the screen dimmed. The woman in 4A had given up the pretense of her eye mask. The British passenger in 1B, mid-50s tweed jacket. The particular stillness of someone who has decided to witness something carefully, had lowered his newspaper entirely and was watching row 2 with undisguised attention. Sophia reappeared. Douglas immediately changed registers from the intimate menace of his voice to Maya to the loud performative authority he used with staff. He told her he needed another drink. Sophia said carefully that she was going to offer coffee alongside any further service. She deployed the professional language of de-escalation with the skill of someone who has rehearsed it thousands of times. Douglas said, "I want the drink, not the lecture." Get your senior colleague if you are not capable of basic service. Natalie stepped out of the galley entrance. Her chin was up. Her hands were at her sides. She said, "Sophia is the senior colleague on this route, Mr. Hargrove, and she is following cabin policy on continued alcohol service after a certain point in the flight." Douglas turned on her. His voice dropped to something that was somehow colder than shouting. "Nobody asked you," he said. "Get back to your section." Natalie did not move. The cabin was very quiet. The engines were a constant background hum, indifferent. Douglas looked back at Maya. She had not touched her plate since his interrupted sentence. She was watching him with the still attention she had given everything all evening, and he felt with sudden clarity that she had been watching him the same way from the very beginning. That the tablet had never been the primary activity. That he had been. "I don't know what diversity program dropped you in this seat," he said. His voice was loud now, not shouting, but a clear carrying register that put every word into the first-class cabin without ambiguity. He was past caring about performance. He wanted her to feel it. "I have been flying this route since before you could afford a bus ticket. This cabin has a standard, and you are standing underneath it." The cabin absorbed his words the way it had absorbed everything else, with silence, with held breath. Cassandra's viewer count read 27,000. The comments were no longer scrolling. They were flooding. Maya looked at Douglas Hargrove for a long, measured moment. The bourbon from his previous drink had left a faint ring on his tray table. His garment bag was crammed in the overhead bin above them. His shoes were somewhere beneath his seat. He was taking up far more than his portion of the shared center console and the shared air in this small pressurized space. She said, her voice carrying the same quiet, surgical precision it had carried all night. "I am going to give you one opportunity to stop, not for my sake, for yours." Douglas laughed. It was the laugh of a man who has never once faced a consequence he could not redirect or purchase his way around. It was the laugh of a man who had taken a wrong step in the dark and did not know yet that the floor had ended. He held up his glass in a mocking toast. "Right," he said. "One opportunity. From the woman with the points upgrade. Tell me more about what I should be afraid of." Maya said nothing. She picked up her tablet. She opened the executive portal, and this time she did not close it. Douglas could not see her screen. He turned away satisfied and flagged down the flight attendant near row 4. A young man barely out of training, clearly nervous, and in a quiet, threatening voice told him exactly what would happen to his career prospects at this airline if he did not bring him one more drink. The young man went to the galley. He came back with the drink. Sophia found out 30 seconds later. She stood in the galley with her back to the cabin and took exactly 4 controlled breaths the way her mother had taught her to manage things that were too large to hold. Natalie put a hand on her arm and said, "You do not have to absorb this," Sophia said very quietly. "I have been absorbing it for 11 years. A few more hours will not kill me." It was not pride. It was the specific grief of someone who has made peace with the unacceptable for so long that they have forgotten they had a choice, Natalie said. "That woman in 2A has been watching him the whole flight. She has not reacted once. I do not know who she is, but she is not afraid of him." Afraid. Sophia looked toward the curtain. Then she said, "That makes one of us." She straightened. She walked back into the cabin. She was 24 years old, and she owned one interview suit. It was charcoal, the same color she would think much later, with a precision that felt like something as the sweater she would be wearing tonight. She had bought it secondhand from a consignment store in Ann Arbor during her second year of the MBA program at the University of Michigan, had taken it to a tailor who did alterations out of his garage and paid $20 to have the sleeves shortened. She had worn it to every interview she had been given, which was 3, and to every presentation she had been allowed to give, which was 6, and she had dry cleaned it after each one and hung it in the narrow closet of the off-campus apartment she shared with 2 other students. She was flying for the first time in a business-class seat. Professor James Okafor, no relation to anyone. Simply a man who had watched Maya rewrite her business plan 17 times in his advanced corporate strategy seminar and had decided that it deserved to be heard by people with money, had cashed in a decade of accumulated miles to put her in 4A on the Detroit to LaGuardia morning flight. He had written her a note that she still had somewhere. "You have earned this room. Do not let anyone tell you otherwise. She found her seat. She settled in. She smiled at the flight attendant who was passing with the pre-departure beverages. The flight attendant smiled back. Then she paused, looked at Maya's boarding pass, looked at Maya, said with the practiced warmth of someone who genuinely believed they were being helpful, "I'm sorry, honey. Are you sure you're in the right section? Economy is through the—" She stopped. The boarding pass was in her hand. She looked at it again. "Oh," she corrected the smile. "My apologies. Let me get you a beverage." Maya said thank you. The smile came back, but it had been recalibrated. Smaller. The warmth was still there, but it was different now, careful, adjusted the smile of someone managing a situation they had not expected. Maya sat in 4A and looked out the window at the Detroit morning and did not say anything. The man who settled into 4B 40 minutes later introduced himself as a financial consultant, heading to a conference. He was friendly, well-dressed, approximately 40. He asked Maya what she did. She told him she was an MBA candidate presenting at an investor conference in New York. He said with the specific warmth of someone who means what they say and has no idea how it lands. "Good for you. That is great. Really." It was the tone someone uses for a child who has learned a new trick. She looked out the window for the rest of the flight. Not from defeat, from choice. She was thinking, and she needed the window for it. The gray Michigan sky giving way to clouds and then to open brightness above them. The world reduced to two colors, and in that simplicity she was able to think very clearly. She thought about the investor conference, about the 3 minutes she would be given to present the seed concept that would become her first consulting firm, about the specific argument she had not yet cracked in the revenue projection on page 7 of her plan. She did not think about the flight attendant's recalibrated smile. She filed it away instead, not in bitterness. In her memory, in the place she kept things that mattered that she was not ready to use yet. She cracked the revenue projection argument somewhere over Pennsylvania. She wrote it in the margins of her printed plan in the handwriting she used when she was thinking fast, cramped, angular, entirely legible only to her. That investor conference changed her life. One conversation, one introduction, one meeting that followed the meeting and the seed funding for what would become over 20 years one of the most quietly powerful holding companies in American aviation. She never forgot the flight attendant's recalibrated smile. She kept it in the same file as the consultant's good for you. She kept it next to the night in a Chicago hotel lobby when the doorman asked if she was there for the service entrance, and the conference in Atlanta where the name badge with her title on it made a man in a good suit look at her with the specific discomfort of someone who has been caught mid-assumption. She kept them all. Not to be angry. To remember what she was building against and why the building mattered. 23 years later, at 35,000 feet above the Atlantic Ocean, Maya Caldwell blinked. The dark water was still below them, and the man in 2B was holding up his glass in a mocking toast, telling her she had nothing to be afraid of. She picked up her tablet. She opened the executive portal, and she remembered Professor Okafor's note. "You have earned this room." She had, and she was about to demonstrate what that meant. 45 minutes after Natalie's confrontation with Douglas over the drink, the forward galley was very quiet. Sophia was writing up a preliminary incident log. Not the formal report, not yet, but the notes she kept for herself after difficult passengers, the private record that nobody official ever saw. She had 7 pages of these notes going back 9 years. She had never submitted a single one as a formal complaint. Natalie knew about the notes. She had seen them once accidentally when she was helping Sophia reorganize her cabin kit. A small folded collection of pages in the front pocket handwriting, compressed and careful. She had not said anything at the time. She was saying something now. "Sophia," she said, keeping her voice below the engine hum. "A young flight attendant," she said, meaning herself. "A young attendant went out there and told a passenger he was violating policy, and he called me the backup singer. And it worked. He stopped pushing for 30 minutes because someone pushed back." Sophia looked at her notes. "What would have happened?" Natalie continued, "if you had done it, with your seniority, your history, your 11 years. Sophia said, "I would have gotten a reputation for causing problems on premium routes." Natalie was quiet for a moment. Then, "And if he does it again tonight to a different passenger, on a different flight. Sophia closed her notes. She looked at the galley curtain for a long moment. Then she picked up the formal incident log tablet, the official one. The one that once submitted, generated a case number and went to operations management and could not be quietly closed without a documented resolution. She had not opened it for a passenger conduct incident in 4 years. She opened it now. She began filling it in. Not the throw that had not happened yet, but the overhead bin incident at boarding. The 5 drinks. The comment about the cabin's standard. The threat to the junior crew member. She wrote it all down with the compressed, careful handwriting she used when she needed to be absolutely precise. She did not submit it yet. She left it open on the tablet, filled out, waiting. Natalie watched her. She did not say thank you. She did not say anything. She just reached over and touched Sophia's shoulder once briefly and then went back to her setup. In the main cabin, Douglas Hargrove was performing a kind of slow territorial expansion. He had been doing it since the drink, moving incrementally into the shared space between the pods, his left elbow pushing past the divider, his voice rising in volume every few minutes as the alcohol moved further into his bloodstream. The first-class cabin had divided itself quietly the way people do when they recognize an atmosphere as hostile without quite naming the reason. Douglas on one side, Maya on the other. And on Maya's side, though, none of them had arranged themselves there, everyone else. Cassandra Flores had been live-streaming quietly for 41 minutes. Her viewer count was at 41,000. She had said nothing during the live stream. She simply held the phone and let the cabin narrate itself. The comments were past individual reactions now. People were watching in groups, sharing the stream, forwarding the link. Somebody had screenshotted Douglas's profile image from a LinkedIn page and posted it alongside the stream. The comment thread below that post had already gone past 1,000 responses. Arthur Blythe had not put his phone down. He was recording with the specific patient discipline of a man who understands that evidence is the raw material of justice and that the camera needs to be running before anything happens, not after. The woman in 4A had pulled her blanket around her shoulders and was sitting upright watching. The British passenger in 1B, who had introduced himself to the purser earlier as Oliver Wakefield, retired barrister London, had turned his seat so that he could see row 2 with his full attention. He had a particular expression on his face, the expression of someone who is watching a familiar kind of wrong unfold in front of them and is deciding at what point to become part of the resolution. Douglas set his glass down harder than necessary. He turned to Maya. She was typing. She had been typing intermittently for the last 30 minutes. Fingers moving quickly across the tablet's surface, the screen angled completely away from him. He found the typing maddening in a way he could not explain. She was not typing at him. She was simply working productively and with purpose in the middle of everything he had done to make this seat hostile, and it was exactly like the stillness and the non-reaction and the complete infuriating absence of submission. And he had been circling it for 3 hours, and he could not crack it. "Let me tell you something," he said. His voice had dropped to the specific register of a man who has decided that the performance is over and what comes next is what he actually means. Not the loud voice. The quiet one. The voice that was designed to reach exactly one person and make that person understand that they were alone with it. "I have been in boardrooms with sitting presidents," he said. "I have closed deals that employed thousands of people. I have built things, real things, things that did not exist before I made them exist." He paused. He looked at her profile, her focus, her stillness, the absolute impenetrability of her attention. "And I look at you sitting there very quiet, very composed, and I know that everything you have, every seat you have ever sat in every room you have ever been allowed into was given to you because of what you look like. Not because of what you have done, what you look like." He said the last 4 words with a precision that was designed to land like a diagnosis. "And I find it embarrassing. For everyone." The cabin did not gasp this time. It went very still in a different way. The stillness of people who have heard the thing said plainly and are registering what it means to have heard it. In 3A, Cassandra's viewer count ticked up to 54,000. She did not move. She simply kept the phone steady. Arthur's expression did not change. He was still recording. Oliver Wakefield set his newspaper down. Maya turned to Douglas. She held his gaze for a long moment, the kind of moment that has its own weight and temperature. Then she said, "Everything I have I built in rooms where men exactly like you were standing at the door telling me the room was not meant for me. The fact that I am still in the room should tell you something about the quality of the door." She turned back to her screen. The cabin absorbed this, carefully, the way you hold something fragile. Douglas stared at her. His jaw was tight. His hands on the tray table were not quite steady, not from fear, but from the specific incandescent rage of a man who has been perfectly answered in public and cannot find a purchase for a response. "You have no idea who you are dealing with," he said. Maya said without looking up, "Neither do you." The silence that followed was the loudest thing in the cabin. Douglas picked up his glass. He held it looking at her profile. She was typing again, working again, already past him while he was still inside the exchange, turning it over, looking for the thing he had missed. He found it, or thought he did. The word he had been swallowing all evening was right there. It was always right there. And he was 4.5 drinks past the point where the decision to say it or not say it required the kind of effort it should have. His mouth opened, and Maya said without turning, "I am going to give you one final opportunity. One." He closed his mouth. He looked at her. She was still looking at her screen. He set his glass down. He looked away. He looked at the window, at the black Atlantic, at the reflection of the cabin in the oval glass. He looked at himself in it briefly. He looked away from that too. His hands were shaking, not from fear, from the specific consuming fury of a man who has been fighting a battle for 8 hours and is beginning to understand, on some inarticulate level, that the battle was never what he thought it was. He reached for his glass. Her mother's name was Gloria Caldwell, and she had been flying for 16 years. She flew regional routes, mostly Detroit to Chicago, Chicago to Atlanta, Atlanta to Charlotte, and back again. The kind of circuits that are invisible infrastructure, the flights that move ordinary people between ordinary places that nobody writes about and nobody makes films about, and that are in their quiet way the backbone of everything. Gloria was exceptional at the work. She had a memory for faces that bordered on supernatural. She could recall a passenger from 2 years prior, remember that they took their coffee with exactly 1 sugar and preferred the window shade up, and greet them with a warmth that made them feel, for the duration of a 2-hour flight, that someone in the world was genuinely glad they existed. She had been passed over for international routes 3 times. Maya was 12 the first time she noticed. She did not understand it then. She only knew that her mother's colleague Sandra, who had been flying with the same company for 9 years to Gloria's 16, had been assigned the London route, and Gloria had said nothing about it at the table. And when Maya asked later that night, Gloria had said, "Sandra is very good." "She is," Maya said. "But so are you." "Better." Gloria had looked at her daughter for a moment. Then she said, "Sometimes good is not the question they are asking." And she had gone back to the dishes with the same practiced efficiency she brought to everything. Maya was 12, she filed it. She was also 12 on the Friday evening in October, that she came downstairs to find her mother sitting at the kitchen table, still in her uniform, hands wrapped around a cup of tea. She had not yet changed. She had not turned on the light. She was simply sitting in the late afternoon gray with the tea and something in her posture that Maya had never seen before, a quality of having absorbed something and not yet recovered the shape of herself. She sat down across from her mother. Gloria looked up. She smiled. She was very good at smiling. She had been doing it professionally for 16 years. Maya looked at her mother's wrists. The bruises were small. 2 of them, 1 on each wrist, the dark purple prints of fingers that had grabbed and held. Not from a fall, not from luggage. She said, "Mom?" Gloria looked at her wrists as though noticing them for the first time. She pulled her sleeves down. She said, "It is nothing, baby. Occupational hazard." Maya said, "Why didn't you report it?" Gloria was quiet for a long moment, long enough that Maya thought she was not going to answer. Then she said, "Because if I report it, I get a reputation for causing problems. And a flight attendant with a reputation for causing problems does not get routes, does not build seniority, does not keep the schedule that lets her be home on the weekends." She paused. "And your college is not going to pay for itself." She said it matter-of-factly, not in bitterness. The way you describe the weather, not what you want it to be, just what it is and what you have learned to dress for. Maya sat at the table until her mother finished her tea. She did not say anything else. She looked at her mother's hands, still elegant, still graceful, a small bruise on each wrist, like a signature she had not consented to cradling the cup. She made a decision that evening. She was 12 and she did not have the language for it yet. She only had the feeling of it, the specific clarifying anger of watching someone absorb what they should not have to absorb someone she loved, someone who deserved far better than the weather. The feeling of knowing that if she ever had the power to change the weather, she would not leave it the way she found it. She would not understand the full shape of that decision for another 35 years. At 35,000 feet above the Atlantic Ocean, Maya Caldwell looked down at her own hands on the tablet. She had been typing for 20 minutes drafting a mending building. The executive portal was open. The incident log was filling. The machinery was moving. She looked up. Sophia Reyes was passing through the cabin with the blanket cart, distributing pillows and extra throws for the passengers who had begun to settle in for the overnight stretch. Her movements were efficient and practiced. Her face was composed. Her hands were perfectly steady. Maya watched those hands. She thought not anymore. She looked back at her tablet. She opened a new document, not the incident memo, not the conduct protocol. A new one. She titled it simply New Role in Flight Standards Direction. She began to type. Douglas said something beside her. She did not hear it. She was already somewhere else, somewhere that mattered more. The dinner plates had been cleared. The cabin lights had been brought down to their deepest overnight setting, a low, warm blue that turned the first-class pods into small, private worlds, each lit by the individual glow of screens and reading lights. Most passengers had reclined. Some had their eye masks on. The hum of the engines had become the ambient fact of existence, constant enough to be forgotten. Douglas Hargrove was eating a second dessert. He had requested it from the young flight attendant, with the specific, quiet coercion of a man who has learned that the most effective threats are the ones he only needs to imply. The attendant had brought it. Douglas was eating it with the silverware wielded in the aggressive, proprietary manner of someone performing ownership of the space around him. He had not spoken to Maya in 22 minutes. He was not finished. He was waiting for the right moment, the way a man with diminishing options waits for an opening. Not strategically, but compulsively, the way someone who has lost the thread of an argument keeps pulling at it. Maya was reading. She had been reading for the 22 minutes of his silence, the tablet propped against the pod's small side table, her posture entirely self-contained, her glass of water half-finished at her elbow. Douglas reached across his tray to cut the last piece of his dessert. The knife caught the ceramic edge of the plate. The angle was wrong, his depth perception slightly gone, his movement slightly too large, the fine motor calibration that good bourbon takes away one sip at a time. The knife flipped off the edge of the plate, turned once in the cabin's dim light, and landed on Maya's armrest. It left a dark smear of sauce across the ivory cashmere of her sleeve. Douglas looked at it. He looked at Maya. "Just wipe it off," he said. "It is not a big deal." Maya looked at the stain. Then she looked at him. "You dropped your knife on my arm," she said. "You have ruined an expensive garment, and your first response is to tell me it is not a big deal." "Don't give me that attitude," Douglas said. He pointed a fork at her, a gesture with the specific energy of someone who uses utensils to make a point. It was turbulence. My arm moved. "There has not been a single pocket of turbulence in the last 3 hours," Maya said. Her voice was very quiet. "And you are intoxicated, and you are behaving like a child." The word child landed like a match on a surface that had been soaking for 8 hours. Douglas put down the fork. He leaned forward, crossing entirely out of his pod and into her space. His voice dropped to something that was worse than shouting a controlled, low, vicious register that he had been keeping below the surface all night and had now decided entirely to release. "Let me tell you something," he said. "I do not know what affirmative action lottery put you in this seat. I do not know who you work for, or who you know, or what story you told yourself to justify sitting here. But you do not speak to me like that. I have built things. I have a £400 million deal closing in 5 hours. I could buy everything you own before my first meeting. You are nothing, and you need to understand that right now in this cabin you are nothing." Maya looked at him. He was close to her, too close bourbon breath and expensive cologne, and the specific, coiled fury of a man who has been telling himself a story about the world for 51 years and is currently watching a quiet woman refuse to inhabit her role in it. She said, "I'm going to give you one final opportunity to stop." He grabbed the glass. It was a single motion, deliberate, certain the motion of a man who has made a decision and is executing it before the part of him that knows better can intervene. He grabbed the crystal tumbler from his tray table, and in one swift, violent arc, he threw the contents directly at her. The bourbon hit her face first, cold and stinging, reaching her eyes before she could turn away, the alcohol burning across her eyelids and soaking into her hair. Then it hit her chest, the cashmere sweater that had been ivory and was now spreading dark and wet across the front. Ice cubes scattered across her laptop keyboard with a sound like small stones, and one hit the corner of the screen and cracked it further, and another slid off the armrest and dropped to the floor with a quiet final click. The cabin erupted, not in unison, but in the specific overlapping chaos of 40 people registering the same shock through 40 different nervous systems simultaneously. Cassandra was on her feet, phone fully up, her voice coming out in a way she had not planned. "Oh my God. Are you seeing this? Are you watching this right now?" Arthur Blythe was already recording with both hands steadying the phone. His expression unchanged, the expression of a man who has seen the worst of what people do and has learned that the camera is the most important thing. From row 1, Oliver Wakefield was out of his seat. His voice cut through the noise with the particular authority of a man who has spent decades speaking in rooms where the stakes were high. "What the hell is wrong with you? Are you insane?" From rows 4 and 5, voices overlapped, a woman's voice high with disbelief and a man's lower saying something that included the word police. Natalie came sprinting from the galley. Sophia was 2 seconds behind her. Douglas immediately raised both hands in the practiced gesture of someone retreating to his defense. "She threatened me," he said. His voice was loud now, aimed at the cabin, appealing to the room. "You all heard her. She threatened me first. I was defending myself. She's the one who—" Nobody moved to agree with him. Sophia stopped at the row and looked at Maya. She pressed a hand to her mouth. Natalie was already beside Maya with a stack of warm towels, her voice shaking in a way she was not trying to hide. "Ma'am? Oh God. Are you hurt? Did it reach your eyes?" Maya accepted the first towel. She wiped her face with the slow, methodical care of someone who is doing one thing at a time and not allowing any of the things to become each other. She wiped her eyelids. She blotted the sweater. She looked down at her laptop, still on the screen, still running the keyboard wet. She looked at it for exactly 2 seconds. Then she looked up. Douglas was still talking, still building his defense, still appealing to the room, still performing the role of the misunderstood man who had been provoked beyond endurance. His voice was the loudest thing in the cabin. His hands were gesturing. His face was red. Nobody was looking at him. They were looking at Maya Caldwell, who had put down the towel and was sitting in the wet sweater with the bourbon still soaking through to her skin, and was looking at Douglas with an expression that stopped every voice in the cabin one by one, the way a light goes out in a row of windows. Not rage, not humiliation, clarity. The specific, terrible, absolute clarity of a woman who knows exactly what she is going to do and is no longer in any hurry to explain it to anyone. She looked at Douglas for a long moment. She said very quietly, to no one in particular, and everyone at once, "Good." Then she picked up her tablet, opened the executive portal, and began to type. The first message took 11 seconds to write. Maya's fingers moved across the wet keyboard with the precision of someone who has typed the same categories of directives many times in many rooms under many kinds of pressure, and for whom the pressure itself has long since ceased to be a variable. To Apex Continental Ground Operations, London Heathrow Terminal 3, Priority Alpha Level, Flight 277. Passenger Douglas Hargrove, Seat 2B. Physical assault on fellow passenger. Metropolitan Police Aviation Security Unit required at arrival gate upon wheels down. This directive carries CEO-level authentication. Code follows. She entered the authentication code. 12 digits, biometric confirmed the kind of access that had been granted to her 10 days ago when the board signed the final papers and that she had hoped she would not need for at least another month. She hit send. The second message took 8 seconds. To Apex Continental Legal and Corporate Affairs. London Office. Meridian Capital Partners Corporate Travel Contract Account, MC, 7741, value $320 million over 5 years. Flag for immediate review and termination, pending my personal authorization upon landing. No communication to Meridian Capital or any of its representatives until I initiate contact, no exceptions. No. She hit send. The third message was to Lena. Lena, Flight 277 has been eventful. I need Gerald Ashford's direct line at Meridian Capital. I also need Raymond Voss on a secure call within 30 minutes of landing. The first board meeting agenda has been restructured. 2 new items at the top. I will brief you on the ground. She hit send. She closed the portal. She placed the tablet in her tote. She looked out the window at the dark Atlantic below them, absolute and featureless, the absence of everything. She had not raised her voice once. She had not cried. She had not called for help. She had not appealed to the room or to the crew or to the cameras that she knew had been running for the better part of an hour. She had simply waited until she had what she needed. And then she had acted. In the forward galley, Owen Park, the purser, 41 years old, 14 years with Apex Continental, a man who took pride in running a clean ship and was currently in the middle of the most disorderly flight of his career, received a notification on his crew tablet that made him stop mid-step. Alpha level override. He had seen this classification once before, in a simulation exercise 3 years ago. An instructor had told the class you will likely never see this in a real flight. If you do, treat it as you would a communication from the airline's most senior executive, because that is exactly what it is. Owen read the message. He read it again. He read the authentication code. He stood very still in the galley for approximately 4 seconds. Then he walked to the cockpit and knocked twice. The cockpit door opened. The co-pilot looked at him. Owen held up the tablet. The co-pilot's expression changed. He said, "Come in." In the main cabin, Sophia and Natalie were working. Sophia was completing the formal incident report, the full one, with the case number and the documented timeline, and every incident from the overhead bin at boarding to the drink 5 minutes ago. She was writing with the same compressed, careful handwriting she used in her private notes, but this time on the official tablet, the one that generated a permanent record. She had submitted it. Her hands were still. Not because she was not afraid. She was still afraid. But she had done the thing, and the thing was done, and it turned out that the weight of it was less than the weight of 11 years of not doing it. Natalie was sitting across from her in the galley jump seat, knees together, writing her own supplementary report. She was 26 years old, and she was shaking slightly, and she was not going to stop until it was finished. She looked at Sophia. Sophia looked at her. Neither of them said anything. Neither of them needed to. In 2B, Douglas was recalibrating. He had stopped appealing to the room once he understood the room was not with him. He had retreated into the private strategy of a man accustomed to damage control, running scenarios, assessing leverage, calculating angles. He had platinum status. He had the Meridian Capital contract. He had Gerald flying in from Zurich. He had 40 people who had watched a heated moment on an overnight flight which happened, which was nothing, which would be settled with an apology and a dry cleaning bill, and perhaps a comp upgrade voucher before anyone got off the plane. This was manageable. He had managed worse. He reached for his phone to call Gerald. No signal, in flight mode. He looked at the seatback screen. An hour and 40 minutes to Heathrow. He looked at Maya. She was looking out the window at the dark water below. Perfectly still, perfectly composed. The wet sweater apparently irrelevant to whatever she was thinking about. He told himself she is nobody. She is going to land in London, file a complaint that goes to a customer service inbox, and disappear into whichever mid-sized company had persuaded to send her business class. He would be in the boardroom at 2. He told himself this until he believed it, which took longer than it should have. Below them, 3 Metropolitan Police Aviation security vehicles were beginning to move from their standby positions at Heathrow Terminal 3 heading toward the gate designated for the arrival of Flight 277. The seatbelt sign illuminated with the standard double chime, and the captain's voice came through the intercom with its practiced transatlantic warmth. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are beginning our initial descent into London Heathrow. Local time is 6:42 in the morning. Temperature on the ground is 9 degrees Celsius. Flight attendants, please prepare the cabin for arrival." The cabin stirred. Eye masks came off. Seats began to return to their upright positions. The lights shifted from overnight blue toward a crisper, more wakeful tone. Douglas Hargrove had been sitting without drinking for the last 90 minutes. It was possibly the longest he had gone since boarding. The sobriety arriving in increments was not improving his mood. It was replacing the aggressive confidence of intoxication with the crawling, cold anxiety of a man beginning to feel the full weight of what he had done without quite being willing to name it as a mistake. He decided on coffee. He summoned Sophia. She appeared within 30 seconds, her face professionally composed, her eyes giving him nothing. He told her he needed a black coffee hot, and had she made arrangements about his bag because he needed to deplane quickly for a meeting. Sophia said, "I apologize, Mr. Hargrove. The cabin has been secured for landing. I am not able to serve hot beverages or access the overhead bins at this stage of the descent." Douglas said, "I am a million-miler with this airline. I think you can manage a cup of coffee." Sophia said, "I understand, and I regret the inconvenience. Cabin regulations apply regardless of tier status during the final descent. Is there anything else I can help you with?" Douglas stared at her. The professional neutrality was absolute, not the tired accommodation of someone absorbing more than they should, but something different, something that had been recalibrated. She was looking at him the way you look at a situation that is no longer your problem to manage. Owen Park emerged from the galley. He walked directly past Douglas without acknowledging him. He stopped at row 2A. He leaned down. His voice was very quiet. "Ma'am, the captain has received your communication through ground operations. All requests have been confirmed and are in execution. Is there anything you require before wheels down?" Douglas went rigid in his seat. He stared at the back of Owen's head. He stared at Maya, who was looking at Owen with the calm attention she gave everything. Maya said, "Thank you, Owen. 2 things. Sophia Reyes and Natalie Dunn. I want their incident reports flagged at the highest priority level, not as supplementary to mine, but equal to mine. They were working under conditions no one should absorb." Owen said, "Already submitted and flagged, ma'am." Maya said, "Good, and please tell the captain I appreciate his handling of the situation." Owen straightened. He turned and walked back toward the galley, and as he passed Douglas's seat, he glanced at him briefly with the expression of a man who has just learned where the floor of the room is. He did not break stride. Douglas said, "What communication? What does that mean, your communication?" He turned to Maya. His voice was lower now, not from courtesy, but from a new, unwilling caution. "What did you do?" Maya looked out the window. The cloud cover was breaking. Below them, through gaps in the gray, the geometric grid of the London suburbs was appearing in the early morning light, pale and orderly and indifferent. She did not answer him. He tried again. "Who are you?" He said it the way you ask a question when you have realized you should have asked it 9 hours ago and have spent 9 hours operating on assumptions that may have been wrong. Still, she did not answer. Cassandra had been live streaming through the descent. Her viewer count had climbed past 94,000. She had stopped narrating. She simply held the phone steady and let the cabin speak. The comments had changed in the last hour. Less outrage, more of the quiet, concentrated attention of people who understood that something was reaching its conclusion and they did not want to miss it. Arthur Blythe had not put his phone down. His expression was the same as it had been for the last 4 hours, watchful, grave, exact. The expression of someone documenting something that matters. Oliver Wakefield in 1B was watching row 2 with the fixed attention of a former barrister who has seen the inside of enough closing arguments to recognize when one is beginning. Douglas looked out his own window at the London suburbs. He could see the airport infrastructure below the roads, the perimeter fence, the long gray runways reaching out through the mist. Normal, expected, and then, at the edge of the runway, approach something that was not normal. 3 vehicles, yellow and black, flashing blue lights cutting across the taxiway in a path that was not heading to any other aircraft. He stared at them. He told himself there is a situation on another runway. A ground incident. Nothing to do with Flight 277. He told himself this with the specific, concentrated force of a man who needs it to be true. The vehicles kept pace with the aircraft as it descended toward the threshold. Douglas's hands were flat on his thighs. He was very still. Maya was still looking out her window, watching the English countryside materialize through the mist. Her expression, the same expression she had worn for the last 3 hours, absolute. The wheels touched the tarmac. The engines reversed with a roar that filled the cabin, and the brakes grabbed, and the aircraft decelerated hard down the runway, and the physical force of the landing pushed everyone forward slightly in their seats, and Douglas gripped the armrest of his pod not from the jolt, but from something else. The vehicles outside were still moving, parallel to them, keeping pace, and then the aircraft slowed, and the vehicles slowed, and they were going to the same place. The captain's voice came through the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to London Heathrow. We have reached the gate. I'm asking all passengers to please remain seated with your safety belts fastened. We have a security situation that requires the attention of local authorities before the cabin can be cleared for disembarkation. We appreciate your patience." A murmur moved through the cabin. Passengers who had been standing reached for the overhead bins, then stopped uncertain. Douglas did not move. He was looking out the window at the vehicles which had parked alongside the gate. He could see the uniforms now, not standard airport security. The black tactical uniforms of the Metropolitan Police Aviation Security. He looked at Maya. She was calmly shutting down her laptop, wiping the keyboard with a clean tissue, sliding it into her tote. She moved with the complete unhurried efficiency of a woman who is precisely on schedule. "This is ridiculous," Douglas said. His voice had the higher register of genuine panic pressing through the performance. He turned to the air marshal, who had appeared from row 4, plain clothes, no announcement, simply present. "I have a meeting, a critical corporate meeting. You cannot hold me on this aircraft for—" "Remain seated, Mr. Hargrove," the air marshal said. He did not raise his voice. From outside, the sound of boots on the jet bridge. The cabin door opened. 4 officers from the Metropolitan Police Aviation Security Operational Command stepped through the forward bulkhead, armed, tactical black uniforms, the specific, purposeful energy of people who have been given a clear task and are executing it. The lead officer was tall, broad-shouldered, with a closely cropped beard and the direct, unhurried manner of someone who has done this enough times that urgency is no longer the appropriate register. He walked to the front of the cabin. He spoke quietly to Owen for 11 seconds. Owen pointed at row 2 without hesitation. The officers moved down the aisle. They passed row 1 without stopping. They stopped at 2B. "Douglas Hargrove," the lead officer said. It was not a question. Douglas stood up with the reflex of a man who has always stood up when addressed because standing up has always been an assertion of presence. His voice reached for the register of authority and found instead the register of someone impersonating it. "This is a misunderstanding," he said. "I am a managing director at Meridian Capital Partners. I have a £400 million transaction, a critical corporate transaction closing at 2 p.m. today. Whatever complaint has been filed, I am willing to resolve it directly and immediately. I can have a check written before we leave this gate." The lead officer said, "Mr. Hargrove, you are being detained under the Aviation Security Act for disruptive behavior, intoxication on an aircraft, and the physical assault of a fellow passenger." He reached for the handcuffs. "Assault," Douglas said. His voice pitched upward. He pointed at Maya. "I dropped a glass. It was an accident. She provoked me. You all heard her. She threatened me throughout this entire flight. You cannot arrest me on the word of some—" He stopped. Every camera in the cabin was on him. Cassandra's phone, Arthur's phone, Oliver Wakefield's phone held at eye-level recording with the steady hands of a man who has cross-examined witnesses for 30 years. The cameras of 4 other passengers who had been recording since the drink. The aircraft's own internal documentation system flagged and running since Owen filed the override report. The word was right there on Douglas's tongue. The same word that had been there all night behind every sentence, the load-bearing word of every assumption he had made from the moment he looked at seat 2A and performed his silent calculation. He swallowed it. "Nobody," he said, on the word of some nobody. The cabin heard the space where the other word had been. It heard it in the specific silence that follows a decision. The silence that is louder than what was said. "Stand up, sir," the second officer said. "Now." Douglas stood. His knees were slightly unsteady. He did not have the Patek Philippe. He did not have the espresso or the mineral water or the cashmere. He had his custom Navy suit now visibly wrinkled and the specific expression of a man who is watching the architecture of his own importance come apart piece by piece in a pressurized metal tube at 6:48 in the morning. The officer reached for his wrists, and Maya Caldwell unbuckled her seatbelt. She stood. She adjusted the front of her ruined sweater with one hand, a single calm gesture of the kind that communicates nothing except that she is composed and present and entirely without hurry. She slung the leather tote over one shoulder. She moved into the aisle. She stood directly in front of Douglas. He looked at her. His wrists were behind him now, the cuffs clicking into place with a sound that carried in the silent cabin. He looked at this woman, the wet sweater, the steady gaze, the absolute absence of vindication or triumph in her expression, and he felt with sudden terrible clarity that he had never once during the entire flight understood what he was looking at. Maya spoke. Her voice was not raised. It did not need to be. The cabin was so quiet that the words simply moved through it, finding every ear landing with the weight of something that has been earned over a very long time. "You spent this entire flight deciding what I was," she said. "You decided I didn't belong in this cabin. You decided I was beneath you, that everything I had was given and nothing was earned. You decided you could throw a drink in my face and walk off this plane and make one phone call and it would all disappear." She paused. "My name is Maya Caldwell. I am the incoming Chief Executive Officer of Apex Continental Airways, the parent airline of this aircraft, this cabin, this route, and every seat in it. The aircraft that you flew in from New York. The airline whose crew you spent 8 hours treating as though their only function was to manage your comfort." The cabin erupted not loudly, but with the specific porous reaction of people absorbing something that rewrites everything they have just witnessed. A voice from row 4 said, "Oh my God." Cassandra exhaled in a way that was audible. Arthur Blythe, recording with both hands, gave a single slow nod. Douglas stared at her. His mouth opened. His brain was running the calculation and arriving at answers that did not fit the structure he had built. "The contract," he said. His voice was barely above a breath. "The Meridian contract," Maya said. "The Meridian Capital Corporate Travel Contract, $320 million, 5 years exclusive routes, was flagged for termination 40 minutes ago somewhere above the Irish Sea. My legal team in London is processing it now." She paused. "Gerald Ashford was contacted before we began our descent. He was extremely cooperative once he understood the situation." "Your 2 o'clock meeting has been canceled." Douglas's legs moved as though something beneath them had given way. The officer behind him held him upright. "The acquisition," Douglas said. "The deal." "The acquisition target firm withdrew from negotiations this morning," Maya said. "Reputational risk. Their legal team saw the live stream before we landed." She said it without cruelty, factually, the way you read a balance sheet. Douglas looked at her. His face had gone through every available expression. Denial, calculation, bargaining, and had arrived somewhere entirely new, somewhere small and undefended. "Why?" he said. He said it the way people say it when they mean something other than why when they mean what they really mean, which is, how did I not see this coming? How did I not understand what I was looking at? How did I sit next to the wrong person for 9 hours and not know? Maya looked at him for a moment. Then she said, "I want you to understand something, not for your sake, for the people who were watching." She turned slightly and her gaze moved through the cabin to Sophia standing at the galley entrance, her hands finally at rest, to Natalie beside her, chin still up, to Cassandra, phone steady, viewer count unread, to Arthur recording everything. to the faces of 40 passengers who had watched something unfold across 9 hours in the pressurized dark above the Atlantic and had made choices about whether to document it, whether to speak, whether to stay. "This was never only about what you did to me," Maya said. "It was about Sophia Reyes absorbing 11 years of passengers like you because the cost of not absorbing it was too high. It was about Natalie Dunn being 26 years old and already fluent in the language of swallowing things you should not have to swallow. It was about every passenger who boards an aircraft looking the way I look and is immediately shown where the ceiling is." She looked back at Douglas. "You did not throw a drink on a nobody. You threw it on the person who just decided what happens next." The officer moved Douglas forward. He moved without resistance. His feet found the floor one after the other, and he walked up the aisle toward the exit in the specific silence of a man who has been emptied of everything he used to fill himself with. As he passed each row, nobody spoke. Nobody offered sympathy. The faces were not triumphant. They were the faces of people who have witnessed something they will carry. At the door he turned once, a reflex, not a choice. Maya was already speaking quietly to Owen. Her back was to him. She did not turn around. The officers walked him out. The jet bridge door closed behind them. For a moment, the first-class cabin of Apex Continental Flight 277 was simply quiet. Then Oliver Wakefield in 1B began a slow, deliberate clap. Not theatrical, not triumphant. The sound of someone acknowledging something real. The cabin joined him one by one, the applause spreading like warmth from a single source, filling the curved walls of the fuselage. Maya heard it. She did not turn toward it. She finished her sentence to Owen, received his nod, and then looked briefly at Sophia and Natalie, who were standing in the galley entrance. Sophia's hands were still. Natalie was crying very quietly, in the way you cry when something has been tightly held for a long time and has been allowed finally to go. Maya said to Owen, "Please inform the passengers they are free to disembark with my apologies for the delay." Then she looked at Sophia directly. "Sophia," she said, "I am going to need a proposal from you, in writing, what this cabin should look like for the people who work in it. I want it on my desk within the month." Sophia looked at her. She said, "Okay." It was the smallest word. It carried the weight of 11 years. Maya adjusted her tote strap and walked toward the exit. She did not look back. The Metropolitan Police holding facility at Heathrow Terminal 3 was a room designed to communicate exactly one thing that the business of the outside world had paused and would resume only on terms that were no longer yours to set. Douglas Hargrove sat on the metal bench with his belt and his watch in a plastic bag and his phone on the table in front of him, powered off its screen, a dark mirror. He had been in the room for 2 hours and 40 minutes. His bespoke suit was wrinkled in the specific way that expensive fabric wrinkles when it has been through something, not the sharp, recoverable creases of sitting, but the deeper, softer compressions of collapse. He had asked for his lawyer twice. They had told him someone was coming. Philip Hartley arrived at 9:15. He was 55, gray-suited from a firm prominent enough that Douglas had heard of them without ever needing them. He came in with the specific energy of a man who is here to perform a function, not to offer comfort. He put his briefcase on the table and sat down and looked at Douglas the way a doctor looks at a chart, with professional attention and without effect. Douglas said, "Philip, I need you to get me out of here. I have a 2 o'clock meeting. The takeover the Kensington Group, Gerald, is already on the ground. We need to call him before—" "There is no meeting," Hartley said. Douglas stopped. Hartley opened his briefcase. He removed a single document, heavy bond paper, printed on Meridian Capital Partners letterhead, and slid it across the metal table. Douglas looked at it. His eyes moved through the language, formal termination of employment, effective immediately executive conduct clause, gross misconduct, breach of corporate standards, equity position forfeited, unvested options nullified. He read it twice. He looked up. "He said they cannot do this," Hartley said. "They have done it." He placed a fingertip on a specific paragraph. "You signed this clause at your last contract renewal. Public intoxication, physical assault, bringing the firm into international disrepute. These are listed explicitly. There is no ambiguity." "The deal," Douglas said. His voice was the voice of someone trying to identify one solid thing in a room that is moving. "The Kensington acquisition. Hartley reached into his jacket and placed his phone on the table screen facing Douglas. The Financial Times digital front page. A headline. And beneath the headline, a video window, Cassandra Flores's edited stream, 93 seconds, beginning with Douglas's speech about what was given and not earned, and ending with the bourbon leaving his hand in a crystal arc. The view count in the corner of the thumbnail read 31 million. Douglas stared at the screen. Hartley said, "The acquisition target firm sent a withdrawal notice to Gerald Ashford's office at 7:14 this morning. Reputational risk, they cited. Their board voted unanimously. The deal is gone." He paused. "Gerald has released a statement." He said the word statement with a specific, careful neutrality. "I can read it to you if you would like." Douglas shook his head slowly. "You are facing formal charges," Hartley continued. "Assault under the Aviation Security Act, disruptive behavior on a commercial aircraft, intoxication above designated limits. The victim is the incoming CEO of the airline. This is not a matter that will be quietly settled." He closed the briefcase. "I have arranged for your bail processing to begin this afternoon. Your passport will be surrendered to the Metropolitan Police pending trial. You are not permitted to leave the United Kingdom." Douglas looked at the plastic bag containing his watch. The Patek Philippe sat on top of his belt. Face up its hands, still moving, time apparently continued. "Apparently." He said, "How long?" Hartley said, "The trial timeline is likely 6 to 8 months. Given the video evidence, the witness statements, there are 9 formal witness statements filed, including a retired circuit court judge and a travel journalist with a recording that has been authenticated, and the status of the victim, I would not counsel optimism." Douglas put his hands on the table. He looked at them. They were not shaking now. They were just hands, no watch, no glass, nothing to hold. At Heathrow Terminal 3 in the Apex Continental Fifth, a private suite, Maya Caldwell had showered and changed into the one formal item she had packed, a clean navy blazer. She was on a call with Lena, walking through the restructured board meeting agenda with the focused efficiency of someone for whom the events of the last 9 hours have been fully processed and filed. She caught her reflection in the mirror briefly. The ruined cashmere sweater was folded on the counter beside the basin. She looked at it for 3 seconds, at the dark bourbon stain spread across the ivory front, at the precise way it documented what the night had been. She picked up the call. "Lena, 2 items for the board agenda. First, a passenger conduct and crew protection protocol, 0 tolerance. No tier exemptions applicable across all routes within 90 days. I want the policy drafted and reviewed before I leave the building today. Second, Sophia Reyes, employee, IDFA 3312, to be formally interviewed for the Director of In-Flight Standards position. I want her proposal brief on my desk within the month. Schedule time for her." Lena said, "Understood." "Raymond Voss has called 4 times since 6 a.m. Maya said, "He can wait until 9. I will be on time." She ended the call. She folded the sweater carefully and placed it in her tote. She picked up the tote and walked out of the suite. In the crew room at Terminal 3, Sophia and Natalie were finishing the last of the debrief paperwork. Natalie had stopped crying the way you stop after something that needed to happen has happened. Sophia was reading back through the incident report she had filed, the official one, the permanent one, the one with the case number. Owen entered. He looked at both of them with the specific expression of a man who has had a significant night and is still processing it. He said, "I have been asked to inform you both that Ms. Caldwell has requested your employee files be flagged for priority review with the intent of advancement." Her exact words were, "They held the standard when it was costly. The company should now protect them." Sophia looked at the table for a long moment. Then she said, "Okay." She said it the way you say something when the word is small and the thing it is carrying is not. The Apex Continental European headquarters occupied the upper 3 floors of a glass building 7 minutes from Heathrow by car. The 9th floor boardroom had floor-to-ceiling windows that looked east over London, the city still gray with early morning, the Thames a dark ribbon cutting through the geometry of it. 20 board members were seated around the long polished table when Maya Caldwell walked through the double doors at 9 a.m. exactly. They stood up. Not because protocol required it, because the room collectively understood that something had shifted overnight. and the person walking through the door was the center of that shift, and standing felt like the honest response. Raymond Voss, the outgoing chairman, was at the far end of the table. He was 58, silver-haired, the kind of man who had chaired this board long enough to believe he understood the room. He looked unsettled in a way that board chairs rarely allow themselves to look in front of their full table. The unsettled look of someone who has spent the last 3 hours fielding calls from shareholders and press and legal and has been unable to get ahead of any of it. Maya placed her leather tote on the table at the head of the room. She stood. She looked at every face around the table, a full, unhurried scan that took perhaps 20 seconds, and communicated without words that she saw all of them and was prepared for this room. She said, "Good morning, let's begin." She opened with the video. She did not ask permission. She picked up the remote from the table and pointed it at the screen behind her and pressed play. Cassandra Flores's edited 93 seconds filled the boardroom. Douglas's voice, low and certain everything you have was given to you because of what you look like. The bourbon leaving his hand. The cabin's eruption. Maya's face in the aftermath, wet, still absolutely composed. She let it run without commentary. The room watched in silence. When the screen went dark, Maya set the remote on the table. She said, "This happened on our aircraft, on our crew's watch, to a passenger in our first-class cabin. I want to be precise about what you just saw. That is not an isolated incident. It is the result of a company culture that has trained its frontline employees to manage passenger behavior rather than stop it, to absorb rather than protect, to prioritize the tier status of an abusive passenger over the dignity of every other human in the cabin." A board member to her left opened his mouth. Maya continued without pause. "Sophia Reyes has been flying for Apex Continental for 11 years. She has never submitted a formal passenger conduct complaint. Not because nothing warranted one, because she understood correctly, based on how this company has operated, that doing so would cost her more than staying silent. That ends today." She pressed a button on the remote. The screen shifted to a new document. The draft protocol clearly structured, the language plain and unambiguous. Effective immediately. Apex Continental is implementing a zero-tolerance policy for passenger abuse. No tier exemptions, no contract exemptions, no history of spend that buys a second chance. If a passenger verbally or physically abuses a crew member or a fellow traveler, they will be restrained, handed to law enforcement upon landing, and permanently banned from every Apex Continental subsidiary globally. No warning, no appeal on the basis of frequent flyer status. None. "Raymond Voss," said Maya. "The pushback from our top corporate clients, the liability exposure alone." Maya looked at him. She said with the same quiet precision she had used all night, "Raymond, we just watched 31 million people see what happens when this company prioritizes a platinum-tier client over a crew member's safety. Those 31 million people are choosing airlines right now. Do you want to be the airline that defends the abuser because he was a high spender, or the airline that made it stop?" Voss did not answer. A senior VP of marketing to Maya's right said, "The positive public response could be significant if we move quickly." Maya said, "This is not a public relations initiative." She said it without anger. It was simply the clearest sentence in the room. "This is the company's standard. We are not doing this because it looks good. We are doing it because it is right. The fact that it also looks good is secondary, and I do not want it treated as primary." The room absorbed this. Maya looked at the screen. She said Sophia Reyes is being formally considered for the Director of In-Flight Standards position. I have asked her to develop a proposal for a mandatory crew protection program, not a de-escalation training. A protection program. The distinction matters. We are not teaching our crew to manage abuse more efficiently. We are teaching this company to stop tolerating it. She paused. Then she said the thing she had not planned to say. It arrived in the boardroom, the way the truth sometimes does not announce not performed, simply present. My mother was a flight attendant for 16 years. She came home from a turnaround one Friday with bruises on her wrists. She called them an occupational hazard. She said reporting it would cost her the roots she needed to pay for my college. The room was completely still. She was right, Maya said. That was the company she was flying for. It was right because this company, this industry, had been built to make that the calculation. My mother was a better flight attendant than anyone she flew with. She never got the London route. She never filed a report. She looked around the table. We are not going to produce another Friday like that. Not for Sophia Reyes. Not for any crew member who boards one of our aircraft. That is not a policy. That is the standard. Everything else follows from it. The boardroom was quiet in the way that rooms become quiet when something has been said that will not be unsaid. Raymond Voss looked at the woman at the head of his table. He was a man who had chaired boards for 22 years and believed he had a reliable sense of rooms and how they moved. He looked at Maya Caldwell, the navy blazer, the leather tote, the absolute earned composure, and found for the first time in a long while that he did not have a ready response. He did not speak. Maya picked up her notes. Now she said, the restructuring files. Page 1. 3 months after Flight 2, 7-7, Douglas Hargrove was convicted of assault under the Aviation Security Act. He received 480 hours of community service fines that wiped out what remained of his personal savings after his legal fees and a permanent global flight ban shared across 8 major airline alliances. Meridian Capital had seized his equity within a week of his arrest. No firm of any consequence returned his calls. He had last been reported working as a risk assessor for a small regional insurance firm in the English Midlands, commuting by train coat collar, turned up looking at no one. The £400 million deal he had spent a year building his identity around was finalized by a different team without him 11 days after his arrest. Gerald Ashford sent no message. There was nothing to say. Sophia Reyes accepted the Director of In-Flight Standards role and submitted her proposal within 3 weeks, 10 days ahead of Maya's deadline. Her first initiative was a crew protection protocol, a structured, documented process for intervening in passenger conduct incidents with full organizational backing and zero retaliation risk. In her first month under the new program, 47 conduct incidents were formally reported that would previously have been absorbed in silence. Everyone was investigated. Everyone resulted in a documented response. Natalie Dunn, now senior flight attendant, was the first crew member certified under Sophia's program. At the certification ceremony, small in a conference room at Heathrow with coffee and no speeches, Sophia shook Natalie's hand and said, "You were doing this before it had a name." Natalie said, "You were too." They both knew it was true. At JFK Terminal 4, a lounge attendant named Marco received an unsolicited performance commendation in his employee file. It was filed by someone with CEO-level portal access. He never knew who sent it, and he never asked. He simply taped it to the inside of his locker and went back to work. Maya Caldwell's official CEO announcement ran in the Financial Times, the Wall Street Journal, and across 11 aviation industry publications on the same morning. The photograph that ran with every piece showed her at the head of a boardroom table in a navy blazer with the specific expression of someone who is exactly where they are supposed to be. She is not smiling for the camera. She is smiling from somewhere deeper, the way her mother had taught her to sit still in the face of things that wanted to move her. Like armor that had learned, finally, that it no longer needed to be armor. On the credenza behind her in the photo, barely visible folded with care, is a sweater, ivory cashmere lightly stained. She kept it, not as a trophy, not as a wound, as a reminder of a 12-year-old girl sitting at a kitchen table in Detroit, watching her mother's hands wrapped around a cup of tea, making a promise she has now kept. If this story moved you the way it moved us, please take a moment right now to hit that like button and share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Stories like this only reach the people who need them most when you pass them on. And if you want to be here for the next one, make sure you subscribe and hit the bell so you never miss a story. We will see you in the next one.